Today we look at 11 NBA players who ruined their reputation in seconds. These players embarrassed themselves in front of everyone, and the video evidence is out there, so while they might have moved past it, we never forgot that it happened. Like back in 2019, the Raptors traded for Kawhi Leonard, who had 1 year left on his contract. He was said to be a free agent at the end of the season, where he had heavily been rumored to join a team in LA. Well, when the Raptors won the 2019 NBA championship, it made things a little interesting, and Kawhi kept quiet on what his future held. He didn't let anyone know what he was doing in the offseason, so during the championship parade, Kyle Lowry started a crowd chant for Kawhi Leonard to re-sign a 5-year deal with the Raptors. Only for Kawhi to sign with the Clippers just 2 weeks later. And I always just found this so embarrassing for Kyle. He's sitting there hoping and begging this man to stay with their team because he led them to their championship, while Leonard's sitting there quiet the entire time because in his mind he already knows that he's going to be signing with the Clippers. And he hadn't even let Lowry in on the news. If he had, it would have probably saved him some embarrassment. But instead, when he's pleading with him to stay because the team needs him, the whole thing wasn't a great look. And no matter how good you are, you're never safe from getting embarrassed on live TV. Just ask Kobe Bryant. And his moment came at the very beginning of Linsanity, where Jeremy Lin had just made his first 3 starts, putting up 25-7, 28-8, and 23-10. So he was heading into his 4th game, which was against the Lakers, and it was going to be his first true test. Ahead of the game, reporters asked Kobe if he was ready for Linsanity, and Kobe acted like he had no idea what they were talking about.
Jeremy Lin, are you following that story at all?
No idea. I know who he is, but I don't really know what's going on too much.
Are you surprised at the production that Lin's had over the past week?
I don't even know what he's done. I have no idea what you guys are talking about. I'll take a look at it tonight, though.
The guy that outworks everyone, had the best game preparation of all time, and knew everything about the game of basketball and the NBA, apparently didn't know that Linsanity had started. And it was all topped off by a reporter asking if he would guard Jeremy Lin if he started to get hot.
Would you consider guarding him if he's having one of those games?
Jesus Christ. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
So the next night, Jeremy Lin proceeded to have his best game of the Linsanity era up until that point, scoring 38 points and 7 assists. To be fair, Kobe never got ahead of himself and really guarded Jeremy one-on-one, but he probably should have, seeing that he dominated that night and the Knicks won that game against the Lakers. So this wasn't the best look for Kobe. But speaking of LA, this past trade deadline brought us a few embarrassing moments of their own, none of which were these players' faults. But the first one involves the LA Lakers and Patrick Beverley. You see, every trade deadline, these two men basically compete on Twitter for all the breaking news and trades that go down. They have a back and forth all day to try to get the news out first. Well, when Woj was taking the upper hand early on, Pat Beverley tweeted, "I see Woj been in the gym. He's given Shams double this year." Well, the very next tweet of a breaking trade was by Shams, saying that the Lakers were trading Patrick Beverley to the Orlando Magic. Not only was this embarrassing and ironic that he just roasted the man, and then he announces that he was traded, but just to make it so much worse, the trade was to Orlando. So he went from playing with LeBron James and Anthony Davis on the most popular team in the NBA to the Orlando Magic, where I really don't have to say much. But this trade deadline also brought out another one full of irony. You see, about a week before the deadline, John Wall came out with this big interview and a clip that went semi-viral of him talking about how when he got to the Houston Rockets to play with James Harden, he thought they were gonna be great.
Beyond trash, like, cause I'm going there thinking James gonna be there, you know what I mean? Once I get traded, but he already wants out.
He then went on to talk about how terrible his experience in Houston was, and he wasn't wrong. It consisted of a 20-game losing streak in his first year, and the Rockets choosing to sit him out for his entire second season while they found a trade for him, which they never did. They instead had to just buy out his contract. So his time on the Rockets was probably the lowest point of his playing career. But then at the deadline, when he gets traded back to the Rockets, it was just so embarrassing. He could have been traded anywhere else in the league, but they had to send him to the team that he would just talked bad about. Luckily for him though, his contract was bought out again by them 3 days later, which it was pretty embarrassing in itself too. The Rockets bought out 2 of his contracts in 2 years. Yeah, that's rough. Now we all know how embarrassing the Game 7 loss for Devin Booker was against Luka, but it at least deserved a mention, so here it is. The same goes for the Jimmy Butler Timberwolves practice story. I feel like I've talked about this a lot, but I just wanted to at least bring it up for this video, so there's the quick mention. But moving on, very few players in this league have ever ruined their reputations more than the few guys in recent years that have turned down massive NBA NBA contracts and then proceeded to regret it and get minimum deals. Guys like DeMarcus Cousins, Victor Oladipo, Nerlens Noel, and Dennis Schroeder. Now Cousins and Oladipo's involved injuries, so they get a little more of a pass because they didn't know their injuries were coming. That's what would make sense here, but DeMarcus and Oladipo should actually be even more embarrassed about their contracts they turned down because they were offered massive deals after their injuries and still said no. Take Cousins for example. He tore his Achilles in New Orleans, we know that. Well, in an effort to keep things classy, they offered DeMarcus a 2-year $40 million deal, even knowing that he would be out for half of the next season recovering. Well, thinking he was going to be different and going to be able to fully come back from this injury, he said no, which was followed up by him getting no other offers from any other NBA teams, so he called the Warriors and asked for a contract, and they gave him a 1-year $5 million deal. He followed that up with a 1-year $2 million contract the next season from the Rockets, so he basically lost out on $33 million here and a very hurt reputation across the league. While Victor Oladipo had just recently returned from missing over a year because of a knee injury, when the Pacers offered him a 4-year $112 million contract that he declined. Even though both himself and the Pacers knew his injury history, he still said no. So they traded him to the Rockets, who also offered him a contract, which was a 2-year $45 million extension. Was traded to Miami, played 4 games, then got injured again. So in the offseason, he signed on for a 1-year $2 million deal. And then this past offseason signed a 2-year $18 million contract, meaning that in the past 2 seasons, he's made about $11 million when that should have been more like around $45 to $55 million. Then as for Dennis Schroeder and Nerlens Noel, well, Dennis turned down and rejected the largest contract of all time, which was $84 million because he wanted a max deal. But instead, he signed on for 1 year and $2 million the next season. And Nerlens Noel did pretty much the exact same thing, turning down 70 because he wanted 120. Then tried to sue his agent Rich Paul for apparently making him make that decision. But the lawsuit was thrown out and should have been, because Noel always had the final say in any decision. Another couple of players that I feel like have ruined their reputations a little bit are Bradley Beal and Damian Lillard. Both guys are extremely talented players, but have now been stuck on flat out bad teams for years. I'm all for team loyalty, sticking with your team and helping them win a title. I don't like to see guys get traded to contenders every year to try to make the next super team that will win it all. But with that said, I think there comes a point when it's okay to leave. Both Beal and Lillard's teams have been making a lot of moves to improve their teams that I can appreciate, but at the same time, they're both also still currently out of the playoff picture again. As for Beal, ever since John Wall's injuries and he left the team, they've always been terrible. Fans have been begging him to leave the Wizards for years now, and 2022 was his first chance to do that, but everyone was a little disappointed when he re-signed on a 5-year max deal to stay in Washington. That was until he came out and said that no other winning teams wanted him. He had no one in the playoff picture reach out to sign him, so his only choice was to stay in Washington. And since he was actually willing to leave, he deserves a little more respect than Damian Lillard, who's preached loyalty to the Trailblazers ever since they got bad back in 2019. But in every interview he does, he continues to talk about how loyalty is #1 for him. And that's backed up by the fact that he just signed a 2-year max extension with them last season. It's just hard to see players that are so great get their talents wasted, and to see players like Damian Lillard, who's so good in the playoffs, not even make it there. But all this loyalty talk has me remembering Isaiah Thomas, who seemed to be extremely loyal to the Boston Celtics. But then they found out he had a nagging injury, traded him away, instantly ruining his reputation for the rest of his career. That nagging injury plays a big part in that, but had the Celtics not been lying to him about the severity of his injury, then traded him as soon as he wasn't useful, maybe we would have never seen his downfall play out the way it did. You see, because he had to go to new teams and felt like he had to make a statement and almost prove himself and make an instant impact, which was why he continued to play through that injured hip for the next 2 to 3 years. So he played bad, and eventually it led to him finding his way out of the league. Plus it was hard for a 5'9" player to find as perfect of a fit as he did in Boston. But had the Celtics just kept him on the team and allowed him to fully recover before tossing him to the side, his career, especially on top, could have lasted a lot longer. Another moment that ruined a superstar's reputation, at least in some people's mind, was the recent Giannis ladder incident. The video of him throwing the ladder looked bad, but the actual story of what happened wasn't actually terrible for Giannis. But it does bring up the other stories of similar things that happened with him, like him cursing at Utah Jazz workers a few years ago, and yelling to his assistant coach that he'd F him up last season, which at least makes you question whether the fun and lovable Giannis is actually a good guy or not after all. But for as bad as that would be, it wouldn't be worse than having a video of you getting punched in the face following you around for the rest of your career.